Blacklisted Taiwan officials respond to being named secessionists by China. Visiting European parliamentarians recommend Taiwan as a hub to combat disinformation. We're halfway through the COP26 environmental conference, but what's climate warrior Greta Thunberg's verdict so far?
I'm Rick Glauert for TaiwanPlus, here in Choekyi, famous for its rice fields and beautiful scenery. I'll be telling you how the country's top modern dance troupe took a performance rooted in urban life into this iconic rural setting.
Hello and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. Taiwan's leading officials have hit back after China released the details of a blacklist of those they say support Taiwan's independence. A number of the island's high-level politicians are named, including a premier and foreign minister, but not President Tsai Ing-wen. This is the first time that China has spelled out concretely the punishment for people deemed to be pro-Taiwan independence. Among other restrictions, they will not be able to travel to China or any of its territories. As Rick Glauert reports, the list has elicited a range of responses.
A new threat to Taiwan leaders from Beijing. For the first time, China spelled out how it will make what it calls supporters of Taiwan's independence criminally liable for life. Despite never having ruled the island, the Chinese Communist Party claims Taiwan as its own sovereign territory and often labels leading politicians as separatists. Premier Su Zhenchang and Foreign Minister Joseph Wu are among those on the list, now banned from visiting or doing business in China. It received a tongue-in-cheek response from Joseph Wu, who tweeted that he had received countless notes of congratulations after being blacklisted and sanctioned for life by the CCP. He said many are jealous for not being recognized. Some ask where they can apply for it. To deserve the rare honor, I'll keep fighting for Taiwan's freedom and democracy. His sentiments were echoed by the premier, who spoke out in defiance. And from Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, a promise to expose China's violence.
严议针对中共对台不友善人士及相关单位采取必要反制作为。我们也将向国际社会揭露中共企图并吞台湾、打压台湾民主及挑战台海秩序的恶劣行径。
China's provocations come in many forms, but this latest rhetoric from across the strait has been met with Taiwan's classic mix of humor and defiance, and a promise to protect a democracy of 23 million people. Damon Lin and Rick Glauert for TaiwanPlus.
A call on Taiwan to become a center for combating disinformation concluded a visit by 7 European parliamentarians. They said the island would be a perfect partner for the European Union in its fight against disinformation campaigns by authoritarian regimes. As James Trader reports, the landmark 3-day visit included meetings with Taiwan's president and digital minister, Audrey Tang.
A final public appearance for the first official European Parliament delegation to ever visit Taiwan. The official purpose of the trip was talks on disinformation, but the geopolitical significance of the visit has not been lost on observers. The historic trip came after the European Parliament last month voted in favour of a report to intensify relations with Taiwan. But at Friday's press conference in Taipei, French MEP Raphael Glucksmann, who led the delegation, said this trip is just the beginning.
It's a first step that should announce other steps.
Earlier on Friday, the parliamentarians held talks with Taiwan's digital minister, Audrey Tang. Tang has led Taiwan's technological response to the pandemic and disinformation threats. Tang later said on Twitter she's accepted an invitation for more talks in Brussels, adding that Europe and Taiwan are partners in the struggle to defend democracy. But analysts say that tangible outcomes from the trip will depend on what happens next.
It will be an important task for members of the European Parliament who visited Taiwan during this delegation to make sure that the lessons that they learned on the ground in Taipei resonate not only in the European Parliament among their colleagues, not only in individual member states that they represent, but also in other European Union institutions, including the Council of the European Union.
Broader European consensus on Taiwan will frustrate Beijing, which on Thursday lambasted the trip.
中方敦促欧方纠正错误，不要向台独分裂势力发出任何错误信号，以免对中欧关系造成严重冲击。
But the delegation was unfazed by Beijing's remarks, underscoring an ongoing shift in the European approach to Taiwan.
It's not a provocation to come to Taiwan. It should be normal. And this is a message we are sending.
This delegation has been described as the first step in warmer EU-Taiwan relations. But as the parliamentarians head home, it's now up to Brussels whether this first step will lead to more. Klein Wang and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
We're halfway through COP26. The commitments of the 150 participating countries are seen as critical for slashing greenhouse gas emissions and averting a climate disaster. There have been pledges so far to protect the world's forest, a plan to stop investing in fossil fuel projects, and a deal by dozens of countries to phase out the use of coal from 2030. But climate warrior Greta Thunberg is calling it a failure. The Swedish activist gave her damning assessment after leading a youth protest outside a summit venue in Glasgow. Thunberg accused world leaders of giving misleading pictures of their country's emissions and creating loopholes to benefit themselves.
The COP has turned into a PR event where leaders are giving beautiful speeches and announcing fancy commitments and targets, while behind the curtains, the governments of the global north countries are still refusing to take any drastic climate action.
Despite the criticism, Lauri Myllyvirta, lead analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air in Finland, says there have been promising announcements out of the conference. TaiwanPlus reporter Louise Watt asked how he assessed the commitments in COP26.
There's been a very long list of countries that have made unprecedented announcements about targeting carbon neutrality in the next decades. Most recently, a long list of countries pledged to completely phase out coal-fired power, including Vietnam, Poland, Chile, Ukraine. And all of these represent very substantial progress and are basically setting a new norm for what for the level of ambition in terms of reducing emissions, which is extremely promising.
India came out with a net zero goal of by 2070, and that has been criticized by quite a few people as 20 years too late at least. What do you think of India's 2070 goal?
For most countries, including India, the governments that are pledging these targets are going to be out of office well before 2030. So what they can really promise or affect is what happens over this decade. And I think that needs to be the measure for how meaningful these pledges and targets are, not what you say will happen 20 or 30 years from now. So for India, I think the fact that the country is targeting carbon neutrality now is a very significant change in perspective. Whether that's 2050 or 2070 is much less important than how that translates into targets and measures and policies over this decade. And that's where there's a lot of work to be done.
How would you describe the feeling after the first week? Is it a feeling of optimism? Is it pessimism? Could do better than expected so far?
I think the very long list of countries that have either announced carbon neutrality targets or coal phase-out targets, extremely promising in terms of the norm that is being created now for what it means to do your part in climate protection. I think right now how tangible these pledges are is just something that is going to be determined over the next months and years.
With the pledges to limit fossil fuels and emissions, the spotlight is falling on those with the biggest carbon footprints, industries. Due to loose government regulations, their operations often go unchecked. As Bing Wang reports, Taiwanese company FORMOSA Plastic's poor environmental practices have impacted communities around the world.
Formosa means beautiful island. It was a name given by Portuguese sailors when they first caught sight of what is now known as Taiwan. But for residents living near Formosa plastic plants and many parts of the world, it means something very different. To them, Formosa represents decades of illegal dumping and polluted waterways. Diane Wilson is a fourth-generation fisherwoman. 2 years ago, she led a group lawsuit that eventually reached a $50 million settlement and a promise of zero discharge with the Texas Formosa Plastics plant. The plant was set up in 1983 in a small town called Point Comfort. It had been discharging pollutants for decades before a U.S. federal judge ruled it a serial offender.
The school is no longer there because it was very close to Formosa, and they've had some, I remember when they had like a 10,000-pound release of hydrochloric acid, and it not only covered the town, it started going over the bay.
Formosa Plastics Corporation was founded by Taiwanese brothers Wang Yongqing and Wang Yongzai in 1954. They came from a family of rice farmers and grew up in poverty in Taipei. They are credited with building a small local plastics company into one of the largest petrochemical conglomerates in the world.
Formosa Plastics is seen as a pride of Taiwan. They build hospitals, they've given to charity, they've employed tens of thousands of people all over the world. But what resonates most with the Taiwanese people is their rags to riches story.
Their production plants are scattered across Taiwan, the United States, China, and Southeast Asia. And in many of those countries, there have been protests against their polluting practices. And here in Taiwan, the story is quite familiar. Dr. Jobin from Academia Sinica has been focusing his research on Yulin County in central Taiwan. And that's one of the biggest petrochemical zones housing Formosa Plastics factories.
So the plant started operating 20 years ago in 1998. And in less than 10 years, they saw a sharp rise of cancer in that area. The rise is very, very fast. And so fast that early age in people in their 40s, in their 50s, die of lung cancer.
TaiwanPlus several times requested an interview with Formosa Plastics. In an email, they acknowledged our request but did not respond to our questions. 3 major environmental groups based in the United States released a report in early October documenting decades of Formosa Plastics violations. They spent 2 years investigating and analyzing the company's history.
Their history of abuses is actually quite long. These include regular toxic emissions well beyond what the company is permitted to emit.
The report found that the Taiwanese conglomerate had been slapped with penalties globally for violations totaling more than $500 million since 1999.
It includes violations of worker safety. And we also saw in Formosa Plastics Group's history a pushback against government regulation, against government protection, against public mobilization for safety and protection and for remedy and justice.
Taiwan is struggling to exist or to survive in the international community. I think here the company, Formosa Plastic, has also a responsibility to not to become a symbol of, to give such a bad image of Taiwan in general.
At a pivotal time when Taiwan is trying to raise its international standing, Formosa Plastic's record of polluting the environment is in stark contradiction to the country's progressive values. Researchers and activists say that Formosa Plastics is not only tarnishing its own image, but also that of Taiwan, the beautiful island after which it was named. Chris Ma and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Lawmaker Hong Shen-han, who is attending COP26, told TaiwanPlus that the government is leading the initiative to bring Taiwanese companies in line with international environmental regulations.
我相信接下来关于这个 Race to Zero 的这个倡议，尤其是对于企业来说，我认为台湾会加入的企业会越来越多，尤其是这些有在做国际布局的企业来说，面对减碳的问题，甚至面对 Net Zero 的这个 agenda， 其实几乎是无法逃避的状况。政府上面应该要扮演一些角色，因为有些，比方说像电子产业，它基本上它就是用电力来作为它的能源的来源，那它会很需要台湾的整体的这个再生能源的占比要大幅的提高。
Coming up, the Tibetan Plateau is a source of fresh water for almost half of the world's population. So why aren't its people involved in discussions at a climate conference in Glasgow? Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Now Taiwan is deprived of an official delegation to COP26, but it is not alone. Tibet is also without an official seat at a climate summit. Known as the third pole of the Earth, the Tibetan Plateau provides fresh water for almost half of the world's population. And like the North and South Poles, its glaciers are melting at an alarming rate. Our reporter Wanho Kilpatrick spoke with Tibetan climate scientists and advocates who are also in Glasgow to make sure that their voices are heard.
Tibet is on the front line of climate crisis, and the international community do not know about it because there's no Tibetan representation at COP26. On the Tibetan Plateau, it is warming 2 to 4 times faster than the global average, just like the North and South Poles. And in addition to that, Tibet hosts the largest amount of fresh water outside North and South Pole. And that means that the glaciers that are melting inside Tibet, the permafrost that is thawing inside Tibet, and the 10 river systems that originate from Tibet are drastically changing and affecting the food and water security of the civilization that flourished on all these rivers in the neighboring countries.
Tibet, like Taiwan, is denied a seat at the table at UN functions like COP26. China claims to represent both, and yet Xi Jinping is a no-show this year. How does that make you feel?
It's extremely unacceptable that China, and in particular Xi Jinping, have declined the invitation to COP26. And one of the most important things about Tibet's culture and history is the pastoral way of life, so the nomadic way of life. And the pastoral tradition inside Tibet has existed for over 8,000 years. So it is approximately 120 times older than the CCP itself. And when you think about the fact that Tibetan nomadic way of life has actually helped protect the environment and keep people around the world safe before globalization even existed. And now, today in 2021, Xi Jinping is doing everything he can in his power to destroy that way of life. At COP26, as you mentioned, just like Taiwan, Tibet doesn't have a single negotiator at the table when it comes to making these climate treaties come to life. Tibetan nomads are actually completely barred from attending or speaking out without retribution from the Chinese government, as we've seen from Tibetan climate activists and nomads that have been jailed or even killed in detention under CCP rule.
This weekend, the COP26 UN Climate Conference's focus moves to nature and environmental conservation. These animals are under serious threat. Many are being driven to extinction due to human activity. Environmentalists say to achieve the net zero target, it is vital to protect and restore the natural ecosystems and biodiversity. The challenge, the activists say, is to preserve the forests, reverse biodiversity loss, and prevent animals from disappearing from our planet. The much anticipated reopening of a bridge in the heart of Taiwan is eliciting excitement among the local community. This is the newly renovated Zhushan Suspension Bridge, which has been closed for 3 years. The bridge in Nantou County will finally reopen on Sunday. The suspension bridge crosses the Valley Canyon of Nantou, allowing tourists to experience its natural beauty. Local vendors are also keen to see people coming back, as the attraction will bring new economic opportunities.
因为无开园来讲，对玩家来讲，会点技术损失的啊，都没有客源了。
期待电梯开放看这边人潮会不会比较多。
Dancers took to the stage in the middle of Taiwan's golden fields as Chishang celebrated its autumn harvest festival. As Rick Glauert reports, the moves of the Cloud Gate troupe performance were designed to send a message about the need to preserve nature and the environment.
Taiwan's top modern dancers jump, prance and sway in tandem with the sheaves of rice ready for harvest. But clouds gather and the heavens open. The dancers rush under cover and hastily change into non-slip shoes. The audience members are given plastic rain ponchos so the show can go on. Come rain or shine, Cloudgate finished their Autumn Harvest Festival performance in the iconic setting of Chishang in Taiwan's East Rift Valley. And for the troupe's artistic director, the elements elevate his dancers' performance.
因为这样的地方这么大，然后有这么多困难的东西打扰着他，他把他自己本来在一个建筑物里面所安全的那个力量释放出来，他必须要去对抗这些风，他必须要去学着跟这个太阳相处，他必须要把他的吼叫或他的力量去传达到对面的山上。
For the audience, who have come from all over the country, it's a multi-sensory experience. The smell of the rice, the feel of the rain and wind, and the sound of dancers' bodies moving.
Chishang is most famous for its rice, with a reputation for being the tastiest in the country. And these fields of gold, backed by Taiwan's tallest peaks, also make it a top tourist destination. It's a quiet rural idyll, far from Taiwan's big cities and traditional cultural centres.
But this performance, called 13 Tongues, was inspired by a very different setting and has, since 2016, been played out indoors in theatres around the world. In 13 Tongues, the artistic director tells the story of his childhood neighbourhood in the historic district of Wanhua. It is one of the poorest places in the capital, but also one that is culturally and historically rich. 13 Tongues references Taiwan's frenetic temple culture. It's informed by the chanting crowds of religious festivals, the heady scent of incense, and the bangs of firecrackers. But for Zheng, his urban neighbourhood has more in common with this iconic rural setting than may meet the eye.
我们或许到每个地方不一定是保护美景，而是这样慈善的精神，这样人跟人不断的在摩擦、在前进的精神， 可以再回到万华，让万华可以连接起来，有一个不一样的改变。我觉得这是池上给我们的很棒的一个功课。
Before ticket holders arrive, the farmers that till the valley's fields around the iconic stage are treated to an exclusive performance by Cloudgate. At its heart, the festival is about celebrating and protecting this rural life while keeping it culturally connected to the country's big cities.
我本身就很喜欢大自然，那我也很相信说，人的很多能量跟很多事情是可以从接触自然所得到，所以保护这些花草树木、天空其实是很重要的。那舞蹈在古时候它就是一个巫啊，它就是一个巫师 witches， 所以它跟这个土地跟这整个山云，它是大地，它是在一起的。
Sitting among the audience, it is hard not to see Cloudgate's performance as a celebration of all Taiwan, a modern interpretation of the country's ancient culture, set among its iconic natural scenery. Damon Lin and Rick Lowett for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. We'll leave you with some images of the newest residents of Taipei Zoo. Check out TaiwanPlus News on YouTube and website for this show and more. Stay safe and see you next time.